He woke up that morning with a sense of unease that he could not shake off. The sunlight filtered through the thin curtains and painted soft lines across the room. But it did nothing to lighten the feeling in his chest. His phone lay on the bedside table, vibrating quietly. He reached for it, half expecting it to be a message about work, a reminder, or some urgent notice, but instead it was something he had not anticipated. The message was simple, almost cryptic, yet it carried weight beyond its words. It was an invitation to an event that promised excitement, opportunity, and maybe a touch of danger. He stared at the screen for a long time, reading and rereading the words. Something about the way it was written made him pause. It was formal, yet personal, and it hinted at something more than a simple gathering. He tried to focus on other things, but his mind kept returning to that message. Breakfast was a blur. The toast burned slightly because he could not concentrate, and the coffee was too bitter, but he drank it anyway. He wondered who had sent the invitation and why it had chosen him. The sender remained anonymous, which only added to the mystery. He considered ignoring it, pretending it did not exist, but curiosity gnawed at him. There was something thrilling in the idea of stepping into the unknown. As the day went on, he tried to immerse himself in routine. Papers, meetings, calls, and emails consumed him, yet his thoughts kept drifting back to the invitation. He imagined the venue, the people he might meet, the conversations that might take place. He thought about how this event could affect his career, how it might open doors or close them forever. He also considered the other side, the personal risk, the vulnerability he might feel in unfamiliar surroundings with strangers whose intentions were unclear. He could not decide if the risk was worth it. Evening approached, and with it, a nervous anticipation. He dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were formal yet understated. He wanted to appear confident but not arrogant. His reflection in the mirror seemed to reflect his internal struggle, the tension between caution and desire, between hesitation and the urge to leap into the unknown. He left the apartment with a deliberate calm, though his heart raced with uncertainty. The venue was nothing like he had imagined. It was elegant and understated, the kind of place that whispered sophistication rather than shouted it. The lobby was quiet but alive with energy, people moving with purpose. Their conversations polite yet layered with unspoken tension. He felt immediately aware of his own presence, acutely conscious of every movement, every glance, every breath. He had entered a world where appearances mattered, where every gesture could carry meaning, and where the line between personal interest and professional obligation was blurred. He scanned the room and noticed someone who stood out. The figure was not imposing but carried an air of confidence that was impossible to ignore. Their movements were deliberate, their gaze steady, and yet there was a softness, a subtle warmth that made him feel drawn to them without knowing why. He tried to focus on other things, on the task at hand, on the plan he had been invited to discuss, but his attention kept returning to that presence. The night unfolded with a series of conversations, introductions, and small exchanges that were more complex than they seemed. Every word, every gesture seemed to carry multiple layers of meaning. He found himself navigating not only the plan that had brought him here, but also the currents of attraction and intrigue that ran beneath the surface. The enigmatic figure seemed to appear at every turn, sometimes offering a word, sometimes a glance, always leaving him with more questions than answers. He felt a mixture of excitement and unease. The plan was important, yes, but the tension between them was impossible to ignore. He found himself listening more carefully, observing more keenly, aware that every interaction was shaping not only the night but perhaps something deeper. There were moments of laughter, moments of silence, moments when the air itself seemed charged with an unspoken understanding. He could not tell if it was imagination or reality, if he was projecting his own desires or responding to subtle signals he barely recognized. A brief pause in the event offered him a chance to step away, to catch his breath and collect his thoughts. He found himself wandering to a quiet corner, reflecting on the choices that had brought him here, the risks he had taken, and the curiosity that had overridden his caution. It was in that quiet moment that he realized just how much he wanted to understand this night, to uncover what lay beneath the surface, to see if the plan and the desire could coexist or if they were destined to conflict. the enigmatic figure appeared beside him, as if drawn by the same need for pause and reflection. They exchanged words that were casual on the surface but loaded with meaning underneath. The conversation was a dance, a careful negotiation of distance and closeness, of revelation and restraint. He felt his own heart respond to the subtle signals, a recognition of something unspoken yet deeply felt. The tension between them was a living thing, palpable and persistent. It's impossible to ignore. As the night continued, the events of the plan demanded attention. Presentations, discussions, and negotiations filled the hours, but his mind was never fully on the work. Every glance from across the room, every brief interaction, every accidental touch carried weight. He felt the strain of trying to remain professional while navigating the pull of attraction, aware that every choice could have consequences. He wondered if he was here for the plan or for the person who had captivated his attention, and the uncertainty was both thrilling and disconcerting. Moments of intimacy were subtle yet undeniable. A brush of the hand while passing papers, a shared smile over a clever remark, a mutual understanding in a fleeting look. Each instance left him unsettled and intrigued, questioning his own motives and the motives of the other. He felt drawn into a rhythm that was not entirely his own, a cadence set by the interplay of desire and responsibility. He realized that the night was testing him in ways he had not anticipated, challenging not only his skills, but his emotional resilience and self-awareness. The evening reached a point where the plan itself demanded focus, a pivotal discussion that could shape outcomes and determine success. He approached it with a mind sharpened by the tension of the night, aware that every detail mattered. Yet even in the midst of strategy and calculation, the presence of the enigmatic figure lingered, a constant reminder of the dual forces at play: reason and desire, ambition and curiosity, caution and boldness. He found himself questioning not only the choices he was making, but the motivations behind them. As the night drew toward its conclusion, he realized that the invitation had brought him more than opportunity. It had brought him awareness, a confrontation with his own desires and fears, and a glimpse of a world that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. He understood that the night was far from over, that the tension and intrigue would continue to shape the moments to come, and that he had entered a space where clarity was elusive, and every interaction was a test of judgment and emotion. In the final moments of the evening, he felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The formal part of the event was ending, but the personal journey it had sparked was only beginning. He had navigated the first layer of the night, balancing professional focus with the subtle currents of attraction, and he sensed that the true challenge lay ahead. As he stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights reflecting in his eyes, he carried with him the knowledge that he had entered a world where every choice mattered and every feeling counted. He knew that the next steps would require courage, intuition, and a willingness to face not only the plan, but the desires that had been awakened. The night left him with more questions than answers. He thought about the enigmatic figure, the moments they had shared, and the intensity that had pulsed beneath the surface. He wondered if he was truly prepared for what was to come, or if he had only glimpsed the beginning of a journey that would challenge him in ways he could not yet imagine. The sense of tension and desire lingered, a quiet hum that followed him as he walked home, reminding him that this night had been more than an event. It had been an initiation into a world where the boundaries between ambition and longing were blurred, and where every choice carried the weight of possibility. By the time he reached his apartment, he was both exhausted and exhilarated. He sat down and tried to organize his thoughts, realizing that sleep would not come easily. The events of the night, the subtle interactions, and the questions about motive and feelings swirled in his mind. He understood that the journey had just begun, and that the choices he made in the coming hours and days would shape not only the outcome of the plan, but the path of his own heart. The night had opened a door, and he had stepped through, unsure of what lay beyond, but aware that turning back was no longer an option. The next morning, he woke with the memories of the night pressing softly against his mind. The city outside his window moved on in its usual rhythm, while he lingered in a space between excitement and uncertainty. He replayed moments over and over the glances that lingered too long, the conversations that had felt like a dance between words and something unspoken. He could not stop thinking about the figure whose presence had been a steady pull throughout the evening. It was strange how someone could enter a room and alter the atmosphere without a single spoken demand yet. Their mere presence could twist focus and attention. In subtle ways, he dressed slowly that day, carefully, selecting clothes that felt right for the world he was about to step back into. He had learned something from last night about how appearances carried meaning, how posture and tone shaped perception. At the same time, he noticed a tension in himself. He had not felt before, a mix of nervous anticipation and desire that he did not fully understand. Breakfast was minimal, a piece of fruit, a few sips of coffee, as his mind worked on replaying conversations, analyzing gestures, and searching for hidden signals. Every thought returned to the question of intention and curiosity about the person who had drawn him into that delicate game by. Mid-morning, he found himself at a quiet corner cafe, a small escape from the rhythm of work. He watched people pass by, some hurried, some lost in their own thoughts, and realized, Allah, that last night had left him more alert to human nuance than usual. He noticed the subtleties of expression, the way someone's eyes could convey doubt or confidence or intrigue without a single word. He realized he had been participating in a world that thrived on those small moments, and he had only begun to understand the rules. He thought about the plan he had been invited to consider, how strategy and charm could intertwine, and how one had to move carefully to navigate both hours passed, and he returned to the office, yet his mind was elsewhere. Meetings and messages blurred together, while he found himself drifting back to the previous evening. He analyzed every encounter the way a player studies a game board, noticing patterns and anticipating moves. The person he had met had been more than charming. They had been perceptive, aware of the smallest cues, and capable of using subtlety to guide interactions. He felt both admiration and an unsettling awareness that he was being drawn into something larger than a single event. The evening approached with the promise of continuation. He left the office and made his way toward the venue once again. The streets carried a different energy now that he was returning with expectation. He felt the mixture of thrill and tension coiling in his chest. The event had been more than a social gathering last night. It had been a test and a revelation. Tonight promised to deepen both the stakes of the plan and the unspoken connection that had been established. He walked through the doors, feeling a pulse of anticipation, mingled with the careful attention that the evening demanded. The room had changed slightly from the night. Before, the lighting was dimmer and more intimate, and the people moved with a slightly less formal rhythm. It was easier to observe the nuances of interaction without losing composure. His eyes quickly sought out the familiar presence and found them moving with effortless grace among the other attendees. Their approach was calm but precise, their gaze meeting his for a brief moment that carried more weight than many words could manage. He felt a subtle awareness of his own reactions, the quickening of his pulse, the catch in his breath, the sharpening of his focus. The first hour was filled with structured discussions about the plan, its potential consequences, and possible outcomes. He focused on the details, noting the suggestions of others, the tone of their arguments, and the shifts in attention among the group. Yet even in this professional context, the other person managed to be present without imposing, drawing attention, yet commanding it in small ways. Their comments were measured yet insightful, their presence both comforting and disarming. He found himself noticing details he might otherwise have missed, the tilt of a head, the choice of words, the timing of a smile, all contributing to a subtle dialogue he was only beginning to understand. During a short break, he found himself near the figure again. The conversation was casual on the surface, discussing elements of the plan, but underneath flowed currents of shared understanding and unspoken curiosity. He noticed the ease with which they could switch from professional to personal tones without crossing lines, the way they could engage and retreat with perfect timing. He felt both challenged and intrigued, aware that his own responses were being observed, analyzed, and subtly guided. The tension between interest and restraint was alive and palpable. The discussions resumed with a heightened intensity. Complex scenarios were presented, and everyone was required to react quickly and strategically. He found himself relying on instincts sharpened by observation, the subtleties of influence and perception becoming tools as much as intellect. Throughout it all, the other person remained a quiet but constant presence, often nearby, observing silently, offering occasional input or guidance that was never overbearing, but always impactful. Each interaction left him both more aware and more conscious of the underlying dynamics at one point. A scenario required them to work closely together, sharing notes, coordinating actions, and responding to unexpected developments. The proximity was brief, yet enough to heighten awareness of the other. Hands brushed over papers, a glance caught at the edge of vision, a quiet agreement without words passed between them. He felt the heat of attention, the pull of curiosity, and the thrill of shared focus. It was difficult to separate the professional necessity from the personal intrigue, yet that was part of the challenge, part of the subtle game that was unfolding. They moved through the evening balancing the plan with the growing tension between them. Every conversation, every decision carried multiple layers, meaning both practical and emotional. He realized that navigating the plan required not only skill, but also awareness of human dynamics. The other person seemed to anticipate shifts before they occurred, guiding without leading, controlling without demanding. He was drawn into a rhythm that required presence, patience, and adaptability. Aware that any misstep could affect outcomes both immediate and long-term after. One particularly intense discussion, they found a quiet moment on the balcony. The city lights stretched beneath them, casting a soft glow over the scene. Words flowed more freely here without the pressure of the room, the expectations of colleagues, or the presence of an audience. He felt the other person's attention focused fully on him, the subtleties of expression drawing him deeper into thought and feeling. There was an intimacy to the moment, a sense of shared recognition and curiosity that went beyond the work and touched on something raw and real. He realized that he was becoming increasingly aware of his own reactions, noticing his heart rate, his breathing, the small signs of nervous anticipation that he had tried to ignore. The night was no longer only about the plan or strategy, it had become about understanding and navigating human connection. The tension was both challenging and exhilarating, requiring him to focus not only on outcomes but on presence, on perception, and on the quiet exchange that occurred in every gesture, glance, and word. He felt drawn toward the other while also aware of the boundaries that remained necessary for the context. As the evening progressed, the plan demanded more concentrated attention, scenarios became more complex, and stakes higher. Yet the other person's presence was an undercurrent throughout, guiding, shaping, and influencing subtly. He noticed how easy it was to be influenced without realizing it, how quickly curiosity and desire could be entwined with professional purpose. He reflected on his own reactions, recognizing both the fascination and the danger of losing clarity in the midst of intensity. The challenge became not only about achieving success in the plan, but about maintaining awareness of his own motives and feelings. Night moved toward its later stages with final discussions and summary of the plan's potential outcomes. Everyone's attention was focused on conclusions and future steps. He felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The relief of structure, ending the chaos of complexity, and the anticipation of what was to follow, the personal journey that had been quietly developing throughout the evening. He noticed that even as discussions ended, the tension and curiosity remained alive. Between him and the other person, a thread connecting them that neither could fully articulate but both recognized. When the formal portion of the evening ended, he found himself lingering. The room emptied gradually, leaving pockets of conversation and quiet reflection. He and the other person found themselves once more in proximity, exchanging casual words that carried weight and depth beyond their immediate meaning. He noticed the subtle changes in tone, the way attention shifted, how presence could be both grounding and provocative. He felt a pull toward them that was both conscious and instinctive. Aware that the night had begun something that could not be easily concluded or ignored. As he walked home later, the streets were quieter than before and the city felt different. Softer yet charged with memory of what had occurred. He replayed moments again, the glances, the shared understanding, the brief touches of interaction. He recognized the complexity of emotion that had emerged, the intertwining of curiosity, desire, and professional focus. The night had deepened both the plan and the connection between them, leaving him aware that tomorrow would require balance, insight, and courage. He knew the tension was far from resolved and that every step forward would carry the weight of what had begun in these subtle exchanges by the time he reached his apartment. He was tired yet alert. The memories of the evening were vivid, the feelings sharp. He reflected on the delicate balance of observation and intuition that had guided him through the night. He understood that the plan was important, yet the personal dynamic had become equally compelling. Shaping his perception and decision-making, he knew that the following days and nights would demand attention to both elements, the professional and the emotional, and that this balance would be essential to navigate successfully. He sat down finally, allowing himself a moment of pause, breathing deeply, reflecting on the choices made and the moments shared. He realized that the night had tested more than his skill, it had tested his awareness, his ability to navigate subtle currents, and his capacity to remain attentive in the midst of intrigue. He recognized that desire and strategy could coexist, but that the interplay required care, attentiveness, and self-knowledge. The night had been more than an event. It had been a lesson in perception, interaction, and the quiet power of human presence. Sleep approached, he felt both anticipation and curiosity for what was to come. The figure that had held his attention continued to occupy his thoughts, not as an obsession, but as a source of reflection on his own reactions and understanding of others. He recognized the complexity of feelings emerging from the interplay of tension and desire, and how it had shaped not only the night, but his sense of purpose and awareness. The evening had deepened his understanding of both the plan and himself, and left him ready to face what lay ahead with attention and insight. The day began with the lingering thoughts of the night before, the moments of tension and quiet connection, repeating in his mind like a melody he could not forget. He walked through the streets, feeling the weight of anticipation mingled with the awareness of the plan that was always present at the back of his mind. Every person he passed seemed to carry subtle cues, expressions, and movements that he now noticed more than ever before. He realized that his attention to detail had sharpened, that the world seemed layered with meaning, and that he had become more aware of the interplay between intention and perception. As he reached his office, he tried to focus on work, but the thoughts of the figure from the evening returned unbidden. He caught himself imagining conversations, gestures, and moments that had not happened, projecting scenarios and responses as though preparing for another encounter. His colleagues spoke around him and he responded automatically, but his mind was elsewhere, navigating the complex mixture of desire, curiosity, and professional necessity. He understood that the plan required focus, but he also sensed that the other person had become a part of the rhythm of his thought, and that ignoring this would be impossible. Hours passed, filled with routine and careful attention to tasks. Each email, meeting, and report became a small exercise in discipline and awareness. He realized that the previous evenings had taught him more than strategy. They had taught him observation, patience, and the subtle art of reading human behavior. He noted how small actions carried consequences, how tone and gesture shifted perception, and how awareness of these details could alter outcomes both in the professional realm and in the personal dynamics that were now inescapable. In his mind, as evening approached, he prepared once more to return to the venue. The anticipation had grown over the day, and with it, a heightened sense of awareness. He dressed with care, balancing formality with comfort, aware that the evening would demand both presence and flexibility. The walk to the venue was quiet yet charged with thought. He reflected on the balance he would need to maintain the careful attention to the plan, alongside the undeniable pull of curiosity and interest toward the other person. He realized that navigating this balance would be the challenge of the night, and that missteps could have consequences beyond the immediate moment. Upon entering the venue, he immediately sensed the difference from previous nights. There was a subtle energy in the air, more intense and yet more intimate. People moved with purpose and awareness. The conversations carried layers of meaning and influence. He spotted the familiar figure across the room and felt the familiar pull, a mixture of recognition, anticipation, and unspoken curiosity. Their eyes met briefly, and a small smile passed between them, subtle, yet heavy with the weight of acknowledgement. He felt both drawn and cautious, aware that every move was part of an unspoken negotiation of attention and connection. The evening began with structured activities related to the planned discussions, presentations, and exercises that required concentration and collaboration. He found himself engaged deeply, yet constantly aware of the other person's presence. Their proximity seemed to influence his own thoughts and reactions, their occasional comments guiding without imposing their subtle cues, shaping the flow of conversation and focus. He recognized the challenge of remaining fully attentive to the task while negotiating the unspoken tension that had become an integral part of the environment. During a break in the structured activities, he found himself again near the figure. The conversation that unfolded was casual on the surface, discussing elements of the planned strategies and outcomes. Yet beneath the words flowed a current of shared understanding and subtle recognition. They navigated the space between professional necessity and personal curiosity with skill, each responding to the other's cues, adjusting tone, timing, and posture in a delicate balance. He felt the intensity of attention, in the pull of connection, both exhilarating and disconcerting. As he realized the depth of influence, they held over his focus and awareness as the night progressed. They were paired together for a complex exercise, involving problem-solving and strategic thinking. The closeness required both collaboration and subtle negotiation of space and attention. Hands brushed over documents, eyes met in silent agreement, gestures were timed with precision. He felt the thrill of shared focus, the heightening of awareness, and the subtle interplay of desire and concentration. The exercise became a dance, a rhythm of interaction where every movement and word carried weight beyond its immediate purpose. The discussions and exercises continued, layering complexity and heightening stakes. He noticed the way others responded to his actions, the shifting of attention, the subtle influence of presence. He realized that the night demanded both intellectual acuity and emotional awareness, that success in the plan required attention to the dynamics of interaction as much as the mechanics of strategy. The figure's presence continued to shape his focus, guiding and challenging him in ways that were difficult to articulate yet impossible to ignore. He found himself both learning and being tested simultaneously, aware of the dual nature of the evening at one point. A scenario required a rapid decision under pressure. He felt the adrenaline of urgency and the weight of consequence. The other person offered a suggestion, subtle and precise, a nudge rather than direction. He adjusted his approach in response, their presence, a quiet anchor and guide. The scenario resolved with a mix of relief and heightened awareness. He recognized that the interplay of strategy and human connection had become inseparable, and that his own responses were now influenced by both intellect and attention to subtle cues. The evening had become a training ground for both mind and awareness. A quiet moment arose as they stepped aside from the main Group 2 review notes. The proximity allowed conversation to take a different pace, slower, measured, more reflective. Words flowed easily, discussing possibilities, ideas, reflections on outcomes, yet always carrying undercurrent of personal awareness and curiosity. He noticed his own breathing responses, the quickened pulse, the subtle attention to gestures and expressions. The moment was intimate, yet restrained, a delicate balance between personal engagement and professional necessity, requiring focus and awareness in equal measure. Night advanced with discussions and reflection, interspersed with moments of observation. He observed the shifts in the room, the interplay of focus and distraction, the unspoken negotiations occurring constantly among participants. The other person remained a constant presence, near enough to influence awareness, distant enough to maintain mystery. He found himself measuring responses, considering intention and interpreting subtle signals, aware that every interaction was layered with multiple meanings. The balance of attention to the plan and attention to presence required careful observation and adaptability. By the time the final structured exercises concluded, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and heightened awareness. The night had demanded focus, patience, perception, and emotional intelligence. He realized that the plan was now intertwined with the dynamics of human connection, the interactions of presence and attention shaping outcomes as much as strategy or intellect. The tension that had been building throughout the evening had reached a level that required conscious navigation, awareness, and self-control. He sensed that the evening had been both a test and a revelation. The formal activities ended, a quieter space emerged in the venue. The city lights outside reflected softly through the windows in the room. This became a place for informal reflection and conversation. He found himself, once again, near the figure. Words were exchanged lightly, commenting on the events of the evening. Yet beneath them flowed the current of mutual awareness and curiosity. Each gesture, glance, and tone carried subtle significance. He felt the pull of attention, the thrill of engagement, the quiet recognition of connection and possibility. The evening had transformed into an intricate dance of awareness, presence, and subtle desire. Walking home later, he reflected on the unfolding complexity. The night had revealed more than strategic possibilities. It had revealed insight into human connection. The influence of presence and attention, the interplay of curiosity and desire. He realized that the previous nights had been preparation for this heightened awareness, this deeper engagement with both plan and interaction. He felt anticipation for what was to come, tempered with recognition of the need for focus, insight, and emotional intelligence. The evening had shaped his understanding of both the plan and the subtle dynamics of human interaction. By the time he reached his apartment, he was weary but alert. He thought about the balance that had been required, the careful navigation of tasks, attention, and desire. He considered the subtle influence of the other person, the way presence could guide and shape perception and action without overt demands. He reflected on his own responses, the growing awareness, and the curiosity that had been awakened. The night had deepened understanding of strategy, perception, and connection, leaving him prepared to face the next stages with attention. And inside he settled for the night. He felt the pulse of anticipation still present a quiet hum in his thoughts. The figure that had drawn his attention continued to occupy reflection, not as obsession, but as a source of insight and curiosity. He recognized that the interplay of tension, desire, and strategy had created a new level of awareness in himself, a recognition of the importance of presence, observation, and measured response. He understood that the evening had been a continuation of the journey, a deepening of the subtle game begun in previous nights, and that tomorrow would bring further challenges and revelations. He lay quietly considering the lessons, learned the interactions, experienced the subtle shifts of attention and influence. The night had demanded concentration, patience, and awareness, not only of the plan but of human behavior, the signals and cues that shape perception and outcome. He realized that navigating both required presence, self-knowledge, and adaptability, a recognition of the balance between professional focus and the undeniable pull of curiosity and interest. The evening had provided both challenge and revelation, preparing him for the unfolding path ahead. The day began with a strange mix of anticipation and caution. He woke with the memory of the previous nights pressing lightly against his mind, the moments of tension, subtle connection, and unspoken curiosity replaying like a quiet echo. He stretched slowly, aware of the pull of the night, yet trying to prepare himself for what was ahead. Today felt different somehow, heavier with possibilities and consequences. Every step of the morning routine carried a quiet tension in his thoughts, turning over the details of the plan while simultaneously considering the interactions that had lingered in his mind. He understood that tonight, like the nights before, would demand both presence and discernment. He dressed with careful attention, noting how clothing could shape perception and influence confidence. Simple choices carried weight: the cut of a sleeve, the fit of a jacket, the combination of colors and textures. He moved through the day performing tasks with mechanical precision, yet his mind remained tuned to anticipation. Every phone call, every email, and every interaction at work was colored by the awareness of the night to come. He felt a growing tension within himself between the need to remain focused on tasks and the undeniable pull of curiosity and interest toward the person who had captured his attention. It was a delicate balance, one that required self-control and observation. By late afternoon, he left work and began the familiar walk toward the venue. The street seemed quieter than usual, yet charged with possibility. He noticed small details, the patterns of movement in people around him, the subtle shifts in tone and posture in those passing by. His senses were heightened, tuned to perception both for the plan and the awareness that had become essential in the presence of the other person. Every step carried the sense of preparation, the careful mental rehearsal of interactions, and the subtle anticipation that had grown over the past nights. He understood that tonight could push boundaries that had been maintained thus far, and that careful attention would be required upon entering the venue. He immediately sensed the shift in atmosphere. The room was more intimate, the energy more concentrated. People moved with purpose, yet there was a current of expectation that threaded through every corner. He spotted the familiar figure moving among the attendees and felt the familiar pull, a combination of recognition and curiosity that had become impossible to ignore. Their eyes met briefly across the room, the exchange subtle but laden with meaning. He felt a quickening of awareness, his thoughts sharpening the tension between anticipation and caution, between professional purpose and personal curiosity. Structured activities began immediately, discussions, exercises, and scenarios demanding collaboration and strategic thinking. He engaged fully, aware that the plan was important, yet constantly aware of the other person's presence. Their subtle influence shaping his focus, guiding responses, and drawing attention in ways that were almost imperceptible. He found himself balancing concentration with curiosity, awareness with restraint, understanding that success required careful navigation of both the intellectual and emotional landscapes. Present in the room during a break, he found himself once again near the figure. Conversation flowed easily, discussing aspects of the plan, yet beneath the words was the current of mutual recognition and subtle engagement. Every glance, every gesture seemed imbued with quiet significance. He noticed the way the other's posture shifted when listening, the slight tilt of the head, the way eyes could convey thought without speaking. He became increasingly aware of his own responses, the racing pulse, the subtle tension in muscles, the small signs of heightened attention. The quiet intimacy of shared understanding was becoming more intense and difficult to ignore. Later, a scenario required them to work closely together under time constraints, coordinating actions and making decisions rapidly. The proximity heightened awareness and intensified the sense of connection. Hands brushed briefly over documents, eyes met in fleeting agreement. Words were exchanged with precise timing. He felt the thrill of shared focus, the pull of curiosity, and the subtle tension that had been building over nights. Every action carried dual meaning, both practical and emotional, each requiring attention and care. He realized that the night demanded not only skill, but also emotional intelligence. Awareness of presence and perception, the exercises continued with increasing complexity. He noticed the subtle interplay of influence among participants, how presence and attention shaped decisions and outcomes. The other person remained a constant undercurrent, their occasional input guiding, their presence shaping perception without overt interference. He found himself challenged in new ways, aware that the tension between professional engagement and personal curiosity had reached a level that demanded careful navigation. He reflected on the patterns of interaction, the ways influence and attention intertwined, and how desire and strategy could coexist, yet also conflict. A critical moment arose when a high-stakes decision needed immediate resolution. He felt the pressure, the urgency, and the weight of consequence. The other person offered a quiet suggestion, subtle in delivery, but precise in timing. He adjusted his approach, aware of the impact of their presence and the interplay of focus, perception, and instinct. The scenario resolved successfully, yet he felt the intensity of attention lingering. The pull of curiosity and attraction intertwining with professional responsibility. He recognized that the evening had become as much a test of awareness and self-control as it was of strategic ability. Afterward, they found a quieter space away from the main group. an opportunity to reflect and exchange thoughts in a more personal tone. Conversation flowed, light on the surface, deeper underneath, touching on possibilities, reflections, and insights about the evening. He noticed his own reactions, the subtle acceleration of pulse, the alertness of senses, careful attention to tone and gesture. The moment was intimate, yet measured a delicate balance between engagement and restraint. He understood that the night required navigation not only of tasks, but also of the emotional currents present as. The evening progressed, the discussions became more fluid, less structured, allowing observation and reflection. He noticed the shifting dynamics in the room, the interplay of attention, influence, and perception among participants. The other person's presence remained quietly central, their influence subtle, their engagement measured. He became acutely aware of the layers of meaning in every glance, gesture, and word. Awareness of these dynamics was crucial for navigating the evening successfully, balancing professional purpose with personal curiosity, focus with attention, and strategy with perception. At one point, a private conversation arose, an opportunity for a more direct exchange. Words were chosen carefully, tone measured, meaning layered beneath casual phrasing. He felt the weight of awareness in himself, the pull of curiosity, and the subtle engagement that had been building. He realized that the night had progressed to a point where the professional plan and personal connection were entwined, each influencing the other. The tension was palpable yet measured, requiring careful attention, observation, and self-control. Walking to a quiet corner of the venue, he and the other person paused to reflect on the exercises, the scenarios, and the unfolding dynamics. Eyes met in silent understanding, gestures synchronized with unspoken awareness. He felt the subtle intimacy, the quiet thrill of engagement, the careful balance of attention and restraint. Awareness of self, of presence, and of influence became central. Every movement, glance, and word carried weight both in the immediate context and in the underlying current of tension and curiosity. The night had become a delicate negotiation between professional purpose and personal intrigues. The final structured activities concluded. A sense of relief mixed with heightened awareness filled the room. The exercises were complete, yet the personal dynamics lingered, a quiet hum of tension and curiosity. He noticed how the evening had shaped perception and interaction, how subtle presence could guide, influence, and challenge. He reflected on the careful balance of engagement, observation, and attention required to navigate both plan and connection successfully. The other person's presence remained central, a thread tying together the events and interactions of the evening. Stepping outside into the cool night air, he felt the lingering intensity of the evening. The city lights reflected softly on the streets, shadows and movement creating patterns of observation. He walked slowly, aware of the pulse of anticipation, the awareness of personal connection, and the reflection on professional responsibility. He considered the choices made, the awareness required, and the subtle interplay of curiosity and restraint. He realized that tonight had been a turning point, a test of focus, perception, and understanding. A stage where the balance of plan and personal engagement had been challenged and strengthened. By the time he reached his apartment, he was both tired and alert. He sat quietly reflecting on the evening, on the exercises, the interactions, and the subtle currents of attention and influence. He considered his own responses, the growing awareness, pull of curiosity and desire, and the challenge of balancing professional engagement with personal intrigue. The night had deepened understanding of perception, interaction, and presence, leaving him aware that the next steps would require careful attention, insight, and adaptability. Lying quietly, he felt the pulse of anticipation continue. The figure that had captured attention remained present in memory, not as obsession but as source of reflection and awareness. He realized that the interplay of tension, desire, and strategy had become a central aspect of his perception. The evening had tested focus, observation, and emotional awareness. He understood that the nights ahead would demand similar attention, the navigation of both plan and connection. In the careful balance of engagement, curiosity, and restraint, he reflected on the lessons of the night, the subtle influence of presence, the power of observation, and the importance of careful attention. He considered how desire and strategy could coexist, and how awareness of self and others shaped outcomes. The evening had been more than professional exercises. It had been a training ground for perception, interaction, and understanding of the quiet but powerful dynamics between people. He recognized that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, and the continued navigation of the delicate balance between plan and curiosity. He drifted into a restless sleep, thinking of what had passed and what was to come, aware that the tension and intrigue would carry forward, shaping decisions, attention, and engagement. He knew that the coming nights would test perception, focus, and emotional awareness even further. The balance of strategy and connection had become central, the subtle currents of tension and curiosity guiding the path ahead. The evening had revealed that success required attention not only to the plan, but to human presence, interaction, and the intricate dance of engagement and restraint. The day started quietly, with a lingering awareness of the nights that had passed. He woke with the memory of previous interactions, pressing softly against his mind, the subtle glances, the shared moments of tension, and the unspoken currents of curiosity that had been building over time. He felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness as he considered the night ahead, knowing that it would bring resolution to some questions and raise others. He dressed carefully, balancing formality, in comfort, aware that the evening would demand presence, perception, and the delicate awareness he had been cultivating. He left his apartment. The city seemed different, softer, more reflective of the anticipation he carried. Every street, every movement, and the people around him seemed to contain potential signals and subtle cues that he now noticed more than ever. His mind was alert to perception and awareness, tuned to observe without distraction. He thought about the plan that had been central to these gatherings, the strategies, the outcomes, and the stakes. At the same time, he could not ignore the personal connection that had grown, the curiosity and tension that threaded through each encounter. Shaping his responses and awareness arriving at the venue, he immediately sensed the heightened energy in the room. The atmosphere was charged with focus and anticipation, yet underlaid with subtle personal tension. People moved with purpose, exchanging words, gestures, and glances that carried multiple meanings. He spotted the familiar figure across the room and felt the quickening of awareness, the recognition and curiosity mingling with the professional focus required by the evening. Their eyes met briefly, and a subtle acknowledgement passed between them, a quiet understanding of presence and attention that required no words, though. Formal activities began immediately. Discussions, scenarios, and collaborative exercises demanding attention and strategic thinking. He engaged, fully aware that the plan was the primary, his focus yet unable to ignore the subtle influence of the other person's presence. Their occasional words, gestures, and looks guided perception, drew attention, and shaped engagement in ways that were impossible to separate from the professional tasks. He found himself balancing focus with curiosity, awareness with restraint, understanding that the evening would test both skill and emotional awareness. During a break, he found a moment of quiet near the other person. Conversation flowed lightly on the surface about strategies, outcomes, and possibilities, yet beneath it ran the current of recognition and subtle connection that had been building. He noticed his own reactions, the heightened attention, the quickened pulse, and the quiet tension in every gesture and tone. He realized that the evening had become a test not only of strategy and perception, but of patience, self-control, and the careful navigation of emotional and personal dynamics. The structured activities continued with increasing complexity scenarios, requiring rapid decision-making and precise coordination. He and the other person were paired together frequently, their collaboration marked by an unspoken rhythm of awareness, tension, and subtle guidance. Hands brushed over documents, eyes met in brief acknowledgement, words synchronized with silent understanding. He felt the thrill of shared focus, the quiet tension, and the subtle engagement. That had become a constant thread through the nights. Every movement, glance, and choice carried layered meaning and required careful attention. A critical scenario arose, demanding immediate resolution under pressure. He felt the urgency and weight of consequences, aware that every decision mattered. The other person offered a suggestion, subtle in delivery, precise in timing. He adapted, guided by both perception and intuition. Aware of the influence that presence and attention could exert, the outcome was successful, yet he felt the lingering tension, the quiet pull of curiosity, the subtle intertwining of personal engagement and professional necessity. The night had become as much about awareness and perception as it had been about strategy and planning. Later, he and the other person found a quieter space to reflect. Conversations slowed, words chosen carefully, tone measured. Beneath the casual surface flowed subtle recognition and shared awareness. He noticed the way attention to gestures, the timing of words, and the small cues all carried meaning. He reflected on his own responses, the tension of desire and curiosity, the heightened awareness, and the challenge of balancing engagement with restraint. The moment was intimate, yet controlled, a delicate negotiation of presence. Perception and attention. As the evening progressed, informal discussion replaced structured exercises. Observation and reflection were as important as participation. He noticed the interplay of influence and attention among all participants, the subtle cues that guided decisions and shaped perception. The other person's presence remained quietly central, influencing awareness without overt engagement. He became acutely aware of the layers of meaning in every glance, gesture, and tone, understanding that the success of the evening required both professional skill and subtle awareness of human dynamics. A private moment arose when they stepped aside briefly together. Conversation shifted seamlessly from the plan to reflection on the night's events, observations, and insights. Words carried depth. Without overt declaration, gestures and expressions were synchronized with awareness and intent. He felt the quiet intimacy, the thrill of engagement, the delicate balance of attention and restraint. Awareness of self, of presence, and of influence became central. Every action carried meaning, both immediate and subtle. Professional and personal. Toward the end of the night, the final discussions and summaries took place. Outcomes were clarified, conclusions drawn, and next steps noted. He reflected on the progress achieved, the strategy developed, and the subtle growth in awareness and perception that had occurred over the past nights. The other person remained present, a quiet anchor, an influence and guide, a thread connecting professional purpose with personal curiosity and engagement. He understood that the night had brought both resolution and insight, not only into the plan, but into the dynamics of human interaction. Stepping outside the venue, into the cool night air, he felt the tension and anticipation mingling with satisfaction and reflection. The city lights reflected softly around him, and the quiet streets allowed time for reflection. He considered the lessons learned, the awareness gained, and the subtle connections that had been woven throughout the evening. The night had tested both focus and perception, strategy and emotional intelligence. He understood that the plan had been a vehicle for observation and awareness, and that the personal dynamics had been a quiet but central force shaping engagement and outcomes walking. Slowly he thought about the balance of desire and responsibility, curiosity and focus, awareness and action. He reflected on the subtle influence of the other person, the quiet threads of connection, and the importance of careful navigation of attention and presence. He realized that success was not only measured by outcomes achieved, but also by perception, awareness, and the understanding of human dynamics. The evening had revealed that professional purpose and personal curiosity could coexist if navigated with attention, insight, and self-awareness. Reaching his apartment, he paused briefly before entering. Reflecting on the culmination of the night's events, he understood that the journey had been more than strategic exercises or structured plans. It had been a study in presence, observation, and interaction. The subtle engagement, the layered meaning in gestures and words, and the quiet pull of curiosity and connection had created a new level of awareness. He recognized that the nights had been a preparation for insight, understanding, and reflection, a balancing of professional skill and personal engagement. He sat quietly reviewing the evening in his mind, the conversations, the scenarios, the exercises, and the moments of quiet connection. He considered his own responses, the attention required, the subtle awareness needed, and the engagement that had shaped the night. He reflected on the personal growth, the understanding of human dynamics, and the way perception and awareness could influence both professional outcomes and personal understanding. The evening had been a culmination, a test of focus, engagement. It was a quiet influence of connection as sleep approached. He felt a sense of closure mingled with curiosity for the future. The tension that had built over nights was resolved in subtle ways through attention, engagement, and awareness. He recognized that the interplay of desire and professional focus, curiosity and strategy, observation and perception, had created a balance that was delicate yet sustainable. He understood that the nights had been a journey, a process of learning and understanding that went beyond the plan, extending into self-awareness, human interaction, and quiet connection. He lay in quiet reflection, thinking of the figure whose presence had shaped so much of the experience, not as obsession, but as source of insight, curiosity, and awareness. He realized that the journey had revealed the power of attention, the subtlety of presence, and the importance of careful navigation in both professional and personal realms. The balance achieved between plan and engagement, focus and curiosity, perception and desire had created a new clarity, a recognition of the importance of awareness and reflection in shaping outcomes and understanding human dynamics. But the time sleep claimed him, he felt calm yet alert, aware that the nights had tested perception, focus, and interaction. The plan had been addressed, outcomes clarified, and strategic insight gained. The personal connection had been explored, tension and curiosity acknowledged, and awareness of human dynamics expanded. He recognized that the journey had provided not only professional growth, but also personal insight, the understanding of subtle influence, presence, and attention, and the quiet power of curiosity and engagement in shaping human experience.